Hello, my name is Katie Matthews, and my presentation is on diversity in the LGBT community, with a focus on acceptance of lifestyles and marriages in the workplace. My first slide focuses on diversity and identity politics. The gay and lesbian movement was actually quite divided in terms of identity politics. One group emphasized the similarities between homosexuals and heterosexuals with the goal of integrating into mainstream society. This group was known as the Societal Conformists, and they focused on acceptance and equality of the LGBT community into society. Another group did not want to be a part of the heteronormal world and wanted to break the social roles of that world. This group was sometimes known as queer theorists. Their goal and emphasis was to redefine themselves and separate themselves from society because they felt it was too constraining. Over time, these two groups formed many other groups, including lesbians, transsexuals, and radical activists. Even with the different views, they were able to join together to achieve some key goals through the use of collectivism. Collectivism is the practice or principle of giving a group priority over each individual in it. There is and was ultimately a need for both collectivism and individualism within this movement. The smaller groups needed their subcommunities for support, while the whole LGBT community served to advance the rights and acceptance of all groups into the heteronormal world. Two organizations that helped unify the divisions within the gay and lesbian movement are the Daughters of the Bilitis and the Mattachine Society. They did this to help achieve a set of goals that would allow all of the divisions to pursue their agendas. These and other homophile groups mainly spearheaded efforts to educate health professionals with the goal of reducing the stigma placed on homosexuals. They would then hope that these professionals and other high-ranking officials would use their rank or sway to change legislation which could benefit the gay community. Gradually, a social acceptance of homosexuality came into effect, and more closeted individuals were able to campaign more openly for their rights. Even though the activists had many varying and sometimes conflicting agendas, with collectivism, they were able to help provide a positive impact and a vital role in helping the gay movement as a whole. Without the efforts of educating others about homosexuality, society may not have been as receptive as they have been now. My next slide focuses on changes in diversity. There have been many diversity changes within the LGBT group over the past 40 years. Some key dates are on January 1st, 1973. This is when Maryland became the first state in the U.S. to statutorily ban same-sex marriage. In the following 2 decades, other states joined Maryland in banning same-sex marriage, reaching almost the totality of U.S. states by 1994. On April 26, in 2000, this is when Governor Howard Dean from Vermont signed a civil union bill into law after the state's Supreme Court ruled that same-sex couples were entitled to the same rights as opposite-sex couples, thus making Vermont the first state in the U.S. to give full marriage rights to same-sex couples. This became a law on July 1st. May 17, 2004. This is when same-sex marriage became legal in Massachusetts after the legislature failed to take any action in the 180-day period given by the state's Supreme Court. It became the first U.S. state to legalize same-sex marriage. And then on June 26, in 2015, same-sex marriage became legal in the United States as a result of the Supreme Court ruling. Marriages started immediately, except in Louisiana and Mississippi. Community acceptance has its positive and negatives. There are anti-discrimination laws for many people. Laws such as the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, which prohibits discrimination against employees 40 years and older. The Americans with Disabilities Act, which prohibits discrimination in employment on the basis of disabilities and requires that employers reasonably accommodate individuals with disabilities who can otherwise perform a job. And the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination in employment on the basis of race, color, sex, or ethnic origin. In 2012, the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission ruled that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 does not allow gender identity-based employment discrimination because it is a form of sex discrimination. This ruling was concluded and confirmed in 2015. Although these laws are in place, there are currently only 19 states that have statewide employment non-discrimination laws that cover both sexual orientation and gender identity. And only 3 states have statewide employment non-discrimination laws that cover only sexual orientation, which does not include gender identity. Also, currently, hate crimes based on sexual orientation or gender identity are punishable by federal law under the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2009. As shown on the map, there are still many states that do not have laws in place to protect individuals against termination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. The U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC, is a federal agency that enforces and administers civil rights laws against discrimination in the workplace. They investigate complaints of discrimination based on a number of factors, including, but not limited to, race, religion, sex, age, and retaliation for reporting, participating in, and imposing a discriminatory practice. As stated previously, this is the commission that concluded in 2015 that sexual orientation discrimination in employment is not allowed based on the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. However, these rulings are not binding in courts and would need to be addressed by the Supreme Court for a final decision. The EEOC mediates and settles thousands of discrimination complaints every year prior to their investigation. Sexual orientation discrimination is explained by workplacefairness.com as treating someone differently solely based on his or her real or perceived sexual orientation, whether that be lesbian, gay, homosexual, bisexual, asexual, pansexual, or straight, heterosexual. This means that discrimination may occur because of others' perception of someone's orientation, whether that perception is correct or not. It may also occur based on an individual's association with someone of a different sexual orientation. Someone who is discriminated against on the basis of sexual orientation may also be discriminated against or harassed on the basis of sex, gender identity, disability, such as actual or perceived HIV status, or marital status. Examples of this include different treatment and harassment. Different treatment can mean that you are not given a position or promoted, or that you are being disciplined or fired specifically because the person in authority thinks that you are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or straight. Harassment is when one is forced to experience comments about your sexual or believed sexual orientation, such as mannerisms, sexual activity, sexual jokes, pressure for dates, touching, gestures, hostile comments, or sexual assault or rape. The harasser can be an employer, supervisor, colleague, or even a customer. One example of discrimination that led to termination is Ashlyn Johnson. She was the final of an 8-piece installment of workplace discrimination series by the Center for American Progress. She started working for an employer in South Atlanta and noted their non-discrimination policy. During the time she was there, her reviews were great and the workplace seemed positive. Her employer went on her computer and discovered she was gay per photos of her partner. The day after the discovery, her boss demanded that she resign from her position because her boss did not agree with her lifestyle. Ashlyn spoke to her HR department, and based on that conversation and the non-discrimination policy, she refused to resign. About 1 month later, she was hospitalized in the ICU for 1 week. During this stay, she was FedExed a letter of termination from her employee on the grounds of their attendance policy. After contacting a few people, they determined that there was nothing they could do for her since there were no laws against this. She is now working with the ACLU to help other people in this situation. She states, internal policies are not enough unless someone is willing to enforce them and back them up. Here are some facts about the LGBT workforce. There are same-sex couples in 93% of counties in the U.S., and as many as 4.3 million LGBT people live in states with no actual state laws providing employment protections. According to a 2012 poll from Gallup, 1 in 3 LGBT respondents identified as people of color, and this includes a significant number of immigrants. 37% of LGBT adults have a child, which makes family benefits important to LGBT and non-LGBT workers alike. In a 2011 National Transgender Discrimination Survey, they found that transgender respondents had much higher levels of education than the population as a whole. Also, census data shows a higher probability that individuals in a same-sex couples relationship have at least a bachelor's degree. In contrast to that, a recent poll showed that Americans with lower education levels are more likely to identify as LGBT than college grads, which shows their varying levels of education. A 2009 California state-level survey found that 14% of LGBT adults were unemployed, compared to 10% of heterosexual adults. Transgender workers have unemployment rates that are twice the rate of the population as a whole, with rates for transgender people of color reaching as high as 4 times the national unemployment rate. LGBT workers are also at a higher risk of poverty. Married and partner LGBT individuals with families are twice as likely to have incomes near the poverty line compared to heterosexual parents. Transgender people are almost 4 times more likely to have a household income under $10,000 per year than the population as a whole. One of the main problems is job discrimination without legal protection. The barriers they may encounter as being an LGBT individual can be that they receive bias and discrimination throughout the recruiting and hiring phase. They may encounter on-the-job inequalities and unfairness, and they may receive wage gaps and penalties. LGBT individuals can also receive fewer benefits and pay more taxes, which put the workers and their families at risk. The barriers this problem may include are unequal access to health insurance benefits, denial of family and medical leave, denial of spousal retirement benefits, unequal family protections when a worker dies or is disabled, a higher tax burden for their families, and the inability to sponsor families for immigration. A solution to this problem is the Equality Act. This was introduced by Senators Jeff Merkley, Tammy Baldwin, and Cory Booker, and Representatives David Chichilin and John Lewis. Per the Human Rights Campaign explanation, the Equality Act establishes explicit, permanent protections against discrimination based on an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity in matters of employment, housing, federal funding, credit, education, jury service, and access to public places. To reduce barriers, we would need to pass non-discrimination laws and policies, increase wage discrimination protections, ensure effective and swift discrimination claims processing, foster diverse and inclusive workplace, ensure transgender workers can update the gender marker on their identity documents, and increase data collection of LGBT workers. LGBT workers also need equal access to individual and family benefits. The families of LGBT workers need to be recognized. We need to advance equal access to individual and family health insurance benefits, provide equal access to individual and family medical leave, provide equal access to spousal retirement benefits, provide equitable economic protections when a worker dies or is disabled, revise the IRS tax code to provide equitable treatment for LGBT workers, and provide pathways to immigration and citizenship for the binational LGBT families. There are values of equality in the workplace which will benefit the individuals and the business. LGBT supportive policies will immediately affect the individual by decreasing discrimination and increasing openness about being LGBT. There was a survey conducted by the Williams Institute which explained that LGBT employees who spend considerable time hiding their identity in the workplace have much higher levels of stress and anxiety, which could result in health problems and work complaints. Employers could also benefit in many different ways, including, but not limited, to lower legal costs related to discrimination lawsuits, as well as lower health insurance costs. Businesses will also avoid public image discrimination through a discrimination case or issue. LGBT employees that feel safe being open and out are also more likely to stay in their position, which would save the company the issue of hiring a new employee. Also, an open and diverse workplace can increase creativity, which could lead to better work, innovation, and new ideas. The Center for American Progress provided the top 10 economic facts for diversity in the workplace. They are as follows. A diverse workforce drives economic growth. a diverse workforce can capture a greater share of the consumer market. HR can recruit from a diverse pool of candidates, which will mean a more qualified workforce. A diverse and inclusive workforce helps businesses avoid employee turnover costs. Diversity fosters a more creative and innovative workforce. Businesses need to adapt to our changing nation to be more competitive in the economic market. Diversity is a key aspect of entrepreneurialism. Diversity in business ownership, particularly among women of color, is key to moving our economy forward. Diversity in the workforce is necessary to create a competitive economy in a globalized world. Diversity in the boardroom is needed to leverage a company's full potential. An example of equality in the workplace is described in an article written by Paul Douglas, who is the Executive VP of Commercial Banking for TD Bank Financial Group in Canada. If U.S. organizations could mirror these views, there would be more productivity, a welcoming environment, and greater benefits for the individual employer. This environment started with a stronger pledge to diversity in the LGBT population. The 5 priorities they focused on were building an agenda for people with disabilities, expanding leadership opportunities for visible minorities, expanding leadership opportunities for women, serving diverse communities, and promoting and enhancing a supportive environment for LGBT customers and employees. In 3 years, there were early successes which included the number of employees claiming same-sex benefits had doubled. Surveys and anecdotal evidence told them that LGBT customers and employees were applauding their efforts. TD has also won external awards and recognition, including Top Bank for Toronto's gay community by Extra, a leading gay newspaper, and Employer of the Year from the Gay and Lesbian Business Association of BC. While they're not doing this for the recognition, it does send a positive message to their employees, customers, and communities. He also provided a list of what they had learned. They are as follows: the importance of leadership. Diversity is everyone's job, not just the domain of HR. Diversity is like any other business strategy. Deep-seated commitment is a must. Educate and engage employees. Support what matters to the LGBT community, and community involvement reaps many benefits. Discrimination is not something that we are born with. It is something that is taught or learned. I would like to leave you with a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., who stated, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive